Here we go. Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming today. I'm Andy Miles. I'm Kane Holborn's supervisor, director of study on his PhD.
Thank you.
Kane's going to present Quiet Radicals and Activists in Popular Culture, introducing the now/then dichotomy, and he's going to talk to you about Stop Wars, some Banksy material as well. Any questions you've got at the end, and things you relate them to Kane. I'm only here to kind of speak some of the stuff out and just basically read out Kane's words. So none of this has got anything to do with me. It's all Kane's work, okay? So I'm just kind of helping out with it. Okay, Kane, over to you.
Like, radicals are in popular culture and I am a normal part of the PhD focused on radicals and popular culture, but in this paper I'll give you about the issues of forms for the public organ and relationship between freedom and quiet radical. Probably this paper subject to listen on my quiet radical. Throughout this paper, I will be using committee artist Banksy as a specific example. The laying of the framework for what is rather the maker of the quiet radical. I am presenting today for part of freedom.
Without art, there cannot be change. Instead of meeting aggressors with random and meaningless forms of violence, the quiet radical attacks with intellect. He does not merely respond but performs his response publicly, either secretly under the dark of night, quietly in some dark street, or on some billboard soon to be exposed to the public in broad daylight. What is public? As artists, quiet radicals and activists, we disseminate ideas through the very public, the very now, and the very instant world of the media, as well as its electric counterpart, the internet. It is through a steady stream of digitalized thoughts that we express ourselves, and the vacuum of subjective nature of one thought to the next naturally varies. As a result, our interests gravitate towards those individual areas of interest. The question we need to ask ourselves as quiet radicals is simple. How can we capitalize on these areas of interest to ignite these engines of change in order to make our voices and political statements heard? It is my opinion that Banksy has aided me in answering that question. Where the public world of the quiet radical is electrified but short-lived, it is through the zeal and speed of the digital age that these ideas are naturally disseminated faster and are wider reaching. When the quiet radical is born through the media of the public world, he has begun to capitalize on the media of the online world. The quiet radical has therefore allowed me to create a platform in order to strengthen the radical opinions and ensure that their ideas are recognized. Therefore, we must first realize that the digital age is a public one with a strange duality. On one side, we recognize the very intimate public social arena of the internet, which constitutes the disseminating of personal information, daily and up-to-the-minute bombardment of intimate data. This is what we can call the now. There is the flash-bang approach of the instant, the up-to-date, up-to-the-minute newness, the now which suffers degradation because the information of the online world is always instant and therefore new. However, what is new will always be replaced by the latest piece of now information. That now information is quickly outdated. It is due to the speed at which one idea or one piece of information becomes outdated that another setting for the speedy process needs to be established. Whilst we can consider the now information of the ever-present moment, there will always be another new idea to come along and take the now's place. This is the information which hangs in the world of limbo. It is the soon-to-be boring, forgotten, empty and degenerated then. This is the default setting for information. Like the on-off switch. If on is now, when you switch that light off, the present moment is no longer present. It is passed into the mode which I will define as then. As such, through a regularly renewed stream of data, this stream is constantly updated, outdated, renewed and outdated again. The stream, therefore, exists in a state of constant flux. For the quite radical, this data stream of public social consciousness is the single greatest weapon. As such, this is what I call the now stroke then or now and then dichotomy.
And go without saying that the city seems dreadful and beyond is just, but it's probably back this is the product of the culture.
Street artist Banksy is one of these colourful miscreants. As a street artist, he has not only capitalised on surveillance culture, but also used its cousin, the internet, in order to tap into popular culture and make his outrageous statements properly realised. In this parodic relationship Banksy has with the CCTV nation, Shove is right to pick up on this strange dichotomy which is a part of their relationship. It is also true that the quiet radical could not exist without the surveillance culture and the internet. For this reason, I see a causal relationship between internet phenomena in relation to free speech and the digital arena. This occurs through the figure of the radical. Graffiti art is part of Banksy's makeup. He fits the template, for it is the immediacy of his work which verifies his status. As such, there was a recent surfacing of Banksy's preemptive graffiti works when he released his Star Wars, Stop Wars images. We can see from the image there. Viewed in respect of recent times, the graffiti artist Stormtrooper with a paintbrush in hand typifies the very notion of the quiet radical, for in true graffiti art fashion, that which is on the street yesterday is painted over today. Banksy, however, is only playing with this concept. He is not gratifying someone else's art, but tricking the onlooker into believing his own art has been gratified by another for political effect. Everything about Banksy's quiet radical movement is completely visual. Against the canvas of the public world, his flashbang messages are unashamedly intended for instant effect. In addition to Banksy's flashbang approach, his rogue artist Stormtrooper from the Star Wars franchise has spread through the digital world, hitting the internet via the widely popular smartphone. Through the digital and technological age, the role of the quiet radical has grown, and in our new electric society made activism possible and prosperous on an exuberant, dangerous and exciting platform through which the voice of the quiet radical can gain resonance.
It is important for the quiet radical to get engaged in what's called the popular, whether it's about music novels, films, or weapons, political movement, the radical plot of that supplement because of the bit politics and the group or every material he creates. Those breath and through this panel of thinking about popular culture, feeling to be human, effectively, he was the summit and developed himself for the system and how they created.
In approaching and defining this platform, the radical must become both artist and performer. As recognised through the online world of the now and the then, the war of the quiet radical is fleeting. Both the public world and the online one of the internet are forums I would like to cannibalise for artistic and poetic radicalism, such as Banksy does. The dichotomy of the now and then can be fully realised when we consider Zimmerman's ripple effect in relation to Banksy's artwork. Zimmerman has an interesting position on the power of the internet and the types of social networking artists such as Banksy can use to disseminate their message. He speaks of his astonishment at this, of how everybody has the potential for public life by clicking a publish button. Publish means make something public. It means handing out access to this data to the rest of the world. And of course, when you see teenagers sending pictures of themselves drunk or whatever, they may not have this vision. Facebook makes its business by blurring this line between privacy, friends, and publicity. So whatever the degree of publicity that you intend your data to be under, when you click publish on Facebook, you give it to Facebook first, and then you give it access to some other Facebook users after. I believe it's worth questioning the lasting strength of Banksy's politicised statements in relation to Zimmerman. His thoughts pertaining to public access in viral media. How long does the political power of the now-then dichotomy last? Whilst walls can be scrubbed and graffiti removed, when any graffiti or mural enters the online realm, Banksy's chance of resonating chords with a viewership of radical participants is greatly heightened. For now at least, the now-then dichotomy works, and everything we as users communicate is engraved into online infinity. Therefore, the radicals' daring images and statements maintain political strength online, but are still subject to the then degradation. This is what we can surmise. Even this paper is subject to the now-then degradation. Zizek, however, questions the momentary nature of the quiet radicals' political strength and online presence when he adds, the more urgent question is, rather, what are we effectively running away from when we take refuge in the viral community? Not directly from authentic symbolic engagement, there is something between symbolic engagement proper and the virtual community. It is this space between worlds which has aided my continuing definition of the quiet radical. I believe this is imperative to further my development of the now-then dichotomy, because the quiet radical relies on this dichotomy, where Zizek makes a clear distinction between symbolic engagement proper and the virtual community other, or otherwise the online world. The quiet radical favours a third alternative. In terms of the position of the quiet radical then, he is directly questioning why we must escape the real in favour of the virtual. For the quiet radical, there is a strange relationship between the real, actual world, symbolic engagement proper, and the online or virtual community other. So we must not simply escape symbolic engagement proper. Instead, Zizek's line of questioning lies in accessing the space between the real and symbolic. In many ways, quiet radicals like Banksy take refuge in a space somewhere between these two worlds in order to enact their naughty, cheeky acts of radicalism. I believe that through enacting a dual position between these two worlds, the platform for the quiet radical can be developed. Zizek calls for what is seemingly a world between worlds, somewhere in the middle of symbolic engagement proper and the virtual community other. Therefore, it is necessary to assume that he has defined the new platform for the quiet radical. Zimmerman, for example, is talking about the same kind of access a quiet radical such as Banksy can gain in defining this platform. Zimmerman's thoughts about the way in which Facebook blurs that line between privacy and publicity are therefore pertinent to Banksy and his radicalism. In many ways, then, Banksy is the figure who links together symbolic engagement proper and the virtual community other. We can perceive this truism by the way in which Banksy exists in both these worlds, now and then, for his perceived existence always lies in a state of flux. It is my thinking that this movement is effective in the public world, but stronger in its digital counterpart. In addition, ideas gain stronger form and impact amidst the murky waters of now and then. When the quiet radical clicks publish, their thoughts can be everywhere and therefore enter into a ripple effect. Thus, their idea gains power in the virtual community other.
become confident and intelligible. However, the bonus of become my attempt the cognitive preemptive continue to subject.
Therefore, through obtaining access to the non-self, the quiet radical can enter the online realm uninhibited by any preconceived notions or judgments. Thus, the true identity of the radical in question is open to speculation. He is then able to perform his radicalism by presenting and performing different varieties of selves through the lens of the online world and popular culture forums and platforms such as Facebook and Twitter. These ideas can be shared through the now/then dichotomy entertained by popular culture spectators. Banksy has in some ways even shared his physical symbolic engagement proper. If we follow Zizek's logic for Banksy, it is not so much the case that I myself am, but I myself am not. So if we consider the graffiti stormtrooper shown earlier, Banksy is not present. Rather, the stormtrooper carries his radical message as a non-self. If we proceed on the basis that Zizek's logic allows Banksy to operate as this ethereal non-self in the online world, it is then appropriate to assume that this is also the case for the developing notion of the quiet radical. Therefore, Banksy is neither personified in symbolic engagement proper or virtual community other. It is only with the access attributed to Banksy's non-self that he is able to dance his way between these two worlds. Banksy is a performer, and he performs popular culture in order to be political. Banksy uses the image of the stormtrooper with a paintbrush in order to convey his anti-war sentiments. Nevertheless, I believe Banksy is deliberately counting on the power of the internet in order to disseminate his anti-war views. Ellsworth Jones substantiates this reasoning as he outlines the way Banksy's art is largely reliant upon the digital arena. As one dealer says, Banksy wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for eBay. The two just happened to come along at the same time. It was happenstance rather than planning. No one flipped art before then. It just hadn't happened. But with Banksy, people queued in the queue for hours or 5 hours, 4 or 5 hours for a print. And by the time they were out of the queue, it would be on eBay. In no time at all, Banksy's print had vanished into the online ether. Once again, it was seen that without these online sharing and selling platforms, the immediacy of Banksy's politicised ideas will lose that vital oxygen needed in order to supply the ongoing ember behind his viral artwork.
I can't probably understand that the government of the much to the year and was sometimes yes, the last long of the gospel, but often suicide instead of the movement, finding a new obscurity on something to be available like a lot of the new is elongated. The work the value in the lives and this political message and get all it and more. Thank you very much. I would like to open up another for any questions.
Thank you.